2 years ago, I lived with my younger brother on the East Coast. For the most part, though, we didn't really go out much. I mean, we'd hang out with friends a lot and get food or whatever, but we never really went out and did anything interesting. I started to look up things to do, and one of the most common suggestions was camping because we were right along the Appalachians. I told my brother, but he didn't seem very interested. A couple of days later, I went out and bought a few things like a small tent and some safety tools, then packed up one of my old backpacks and drove out to a nearby trail. Yes, I was really inexperienced, and going camping alone was not a good idea, but I'd only planned to be out for one night, so I figured even if there was a problem, it wouldn't be so bad. After an hour of driving, I got to the trail. No other cars were parked, and I didn't see any other people. I got out and put on my backpack, then walked to the trailhead. It was thin and not a really well-made path, but it was good enough. I don't think it was a popular trail. I just found it by scrolling through a huge list and choosing one that wasn't too long. As I hiked down, though, it became more and more clear how little used this trail was. Bushes were overgrown and blocking the way, and even in some portions, the grass had grown in and made it really hard to tell what was the trail and what wasn't. But after an hour, I made it to the end. After seeing the trail, it was about what I'd expected the camping ground to be. It was small and mostly overgrown, but there was something I noticed right away that caught my attention, a pile of logs on the other side of the camping ground. I walked up to it and saw that flakes of charred wood were blotting off in the wind, so it had to have been used recently, maybe even the night before. I looked around again, not seeing any tents or signs of someone being here. Though unsure about it, I went to the other end and put my things down, then got to work on the tent. It wasn't that late yet, so I took my time to make sure the tent was well made. Once I was done, I took a breather, sitting down and chilling for a bit. There was about an hour left of sunlight, and I spent it eating and sitting inside the tent on my sleeping bag. After a while, I could tell the sun was setting, but soon after, a sound came from somewhere nearby. A crackling sound, like from a campfire. I unzipped the opening and stepped out, being immediately faced by a man sitting across the campsite, right next to where the half-burnt logs were. He was older than me, probably in his 40s, but there wasn't much else I could see from the little amount of sunlight coming in through the trees. He was already looking at me, so I nervously waved my hand at him. The man waited a few seconds, then lifted his hand as well. I went around to the back of my tent and got a pile of sticks, then made a small campfire. It only took a few minutes before it was mostly dark out. There was only the light from my campfire and the man's campfire on the other side. I kept looking over, trying to see if he had a tent or a backpack or something, but all I could see was him every time I looked. I only got more weirded out and uneasy. Where did he even come from? My tent was set up right next to the trail, so I would have heard him walk up unless he came from the other side, which was just empty woods. I sat out there for at least an hour, probably two, and never saw the man move from his spot. He just sat by the fire, looking forward. Eventually, I went inside my tent, figuring I had to be overthinking all of this, and the man was probably just another camper. He was at a public camping ground, after all. I laid down and tried to rest, but I don't think my mind would let me sleep for some reason, so I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint crackling of the man's campfire. I was in there for probably another hour before I heard leaves slowly crunching, making their way toward my tent. I sat up and listened more carefully until I could see the shadow of the man standing on the other side of the fabric. My whole body froze, watching him just stand there for a moment, not moving, not speaking. Then his shadow started moving away as I heard the leaves crunch into the distance. I quickly unzipped the tent and looked out. The campground was empty. The man was gone, having left only the burning logs. I started to pack up, shoving the tent into its holder and even breaking some of the rods just to move faster. I left without ever seeing the man come back. As for what happened out there, or what was going to happen, I really don't know. Not more than a week or two ago, I hiked out on a long trail in the dense woods behind my town. I lived in a really close-knit town with just under 1,000 people, so we were pretty far out from any big populated cities. The woods on the outskirts were very flat, no mountains or hills, but had a few ponds and some small rivers running through the middle. I was heading to one of these rivers. I'd been there before a few times, though I'd never had the chance to camp there until this day. As I could recall from the previous times, I knew it was about a 3-hour walk almost perfectly north. As I walked between the trees, it was very quiet aside from birds and other animals rustling the leaves around me. There were no people or hikers, and I didn't plan to see anyone because this was not even a trail, it was just open woods. But as I was just 45 minutes out from the river, I ran into someone. We were both walking toward each other, and it seemed like neither of us had noticed the other until we were just a few feet away, separated by only a couple of trees. I know I had a confused and almost nervous look, finding it really unusual to run into someone off trail in the middle of these woods. But the man had the same look. I was about to break the silence and say hello, but after a second, his face shifted into a slight nervous smile, and he turned to walk off to the side. I followed his lead and kept on walking as well, but I looked back once I got a little further away and saw the man was no longer walking but almost running away, not saying a word. When running into each other gave me a somewhat unsettled feeling, but seeing him run off like that only made it even stranger. It was like the man did not want to be seen, or he didn't care about the almost impossible chance that we had run into each other. Whatever the case, I kept minding my own business and made my way to the river. This was no campsite or anything, so I just plopped my bag and tent down on the flattest area I could find. Then I got a fire going since the sun was just about to set. I tossed in a bunch of random sticks and twigs that were around and made sure it would burn for a couple of hours at least. I was hoping to stay up and wait until the stars came out so I could do some stargazing away from town. I can often get a good view of the Milky Way, which is a sight I never want to miss out on. Hours passed while I was sitting and waiting until a distinct sound came through the quiet woods behind me, footsteps, slow and careful ones. I turned and looked, not seeing much in the dark as I gazed around, though the footsteps stopped, telling me that while I may not see them, they can see me. I reached down for my bag and picked up a heavy-duty flashlight, shining it at the trees. I could see decently far now, but as I moved it back and forth, I didn't see anyone. I felt my heart rate increasing a bit as the unsettling feeling came over me again. Anyone out there? I tried again, hello. Not even the sound of another footstep. After a moment of contemplation, I started to walk toward where I'd heard the sound from. I thought maybe there was a chance I was mistaken, but I needed to be sure. I carefully stepped through the woods, keeping the flashlight steadily pointing ahead until I got to where I thought the sound was from. I moved the light to my left, looking behind each tree until the light suddenly revealed a large man. It was the one I'd run into only a few hours ago. He was no more than 20 feet away, but even with the light on him, he stood still. In an act of quick thinking, I tried to not react and continued to move my flashlight across the woods, hoping he would think that I somehow didn't see him. Then I began walking back to the tent, trying to act as unbothered as possible. I picked up my bag and looked around once more before quickly leaving my tent and campfire behind and walking into the woods along the riverside. Once I felt I'd made enough distance, I sprinted as far as I could until I was without a doubt away from that man. I found a spot to rest at and sat there, awake until sunrise. I don't think I was followed, as I was able to make it out without ever hearing or seeing that man again. I'm not sure why he was out there or why he had shown up and hid by my campsite, but I never went back to retrieve my tent in fear that I might find out. I used to deliver Chinese food for a local restaurant. I was just a teenager in high school at the time, and whatever job I got wasn't going to be for more than a year or two. I'd say this job was fairly typical to most first jobs or retail and food service jobs because it had some slow and boring days and some busy and stressful days. As the delivery driver, though, I was always thankful to not have to be working in the store and dealing with mobs of customers. On this night, I started at 6:00 p.m. It was a Friday, so I was working a late 6 to 12 shift. As soon as I clocked in, I was delivering orders non-stop for the next 2 hours with no time to breathe in between them. At 8, orders were slowing a bit, but I still had a few more to deliver before I could take my lunch. So I grabbed the 3 orders and set out to get them done before 9. The first one was close, but the next 2 were further out. This isn't uncommon, as our town isn't all packed together. I got to the second house and dropped it off, then headed out to the final stop. It was 10 minutes from where I was, and the tag said it wasn't paid for yet. All I was thinking about during this drive was the break I'd get afterward. Going back and forth for 3 hours straight tired me out more than usual this night. I pulled into the neighborhood and followed the GPS until I got to a back portion where the whole atmosphere quickly changed. I turned down a thin road of cracked pavement and potholes with barely visible small houses on the side, covered by thick bushes and unkempt lawns. When the GPS told me I'd arrived, I stopped the car but didn't see a house. I turned my brights on, and ever so faintly, I could see the outline of a small house pretty far from the road. I then looked at the grass leading up to it and realized there was actually a driveway. It was just engulfed in vines and tall grass. I would never have seen it if I hadn't seen the house first. Knowing I would be unable to even drive on it, I put the car in park and got out with the bag, then began to walk through the overgrown driveway. I couldn't believe how awful it was to walk through, and I couldn't imagine anyone letting their driveway get to this point. Getting closer though, I could see more of the house. It was very small, kind of like a trailer home, and looked to be in a matching condition to the driveway. Vines were growing over the windows, and bushes covered every inch of the nearly decaying house. As I made my way up to the front door, I knew something was wrong. I knew it in my gut and in my head, but I was just some kid with a first job that was scared to lose it, so I felt like I had to do my job, which was to deliver the order to this address. I pushed all my bad feelings aside and knocked on the door. Right away, I heard footsteps coming up to the door. It opened, revealing a young lady behind it. At first, in the dim lighting, she looked very normal, and I felt a huge relief. But it only took a few more seconds to realize that her normal look was eerily out of place with the house in this condition. There was no way she could be so well dressed and taken care of. As these thoughts scrambled through my head, she opened the screen door and said in a creepily calm tone, "Come in." Everything hit me in that moment as I stumbled back a few steps and decided that I needed to leave right away. I turned around, and only a second after beginning to leave, I heard a thud from the side of the house. I looked over, seeing 2 men running out from behind the house and sprinting through the bushes toward me. I dropped everything and started running. I did everything I could to get through the thick grass and vines, but just as I reached the end of the driveway, I stumbled to the ground, tripping over something. I hurried up, hearing their footsteps closing the distance on me. I couldn't even get myself to look back as I ran straight into my car, turning it on. The men immediately stopped and ran back to where they came from. With my whole body still shaking from the adrenaline, I turned the car around and drove away. Of course, I let my boss know what happened, and he urged me to call the police and report it. I was really relieved to know he didn't care about the order and only for my safety, which, looking back on it, it would have been horrible if it were any other way. Police interviewed me and my boss and did a whole investigation, ultimately unable to find any of the people. The property I was on, though, was actually state-owned, and the trespassing sign at the beginning of the road had been dug up and thrown into the tall grass. Their intentions are unknown, but it seems like the most obvious possibility is the answer. I just hope nobody else has to go through what I did, or if they do, I hope they can be as lucky as I was to get away. I had some spare time this night, and having chugged a few coffees earlier in the day, I figured I'd use this energy to go out and make some money. I was delivering for DoorDash, cruising on the highway to my next delivery. It was super late, the roads were empty, and the night was very peaceful, basically every delivery driver's dream. On my way there though, my phone started buzzing. It was the customer calling me, but before I had a chance to answer it, they hung up. Since it only rang for a couple of seconds, I thought it must have been an accident. But in case not, I redialed their number. It rang for a while, but they didn't answer. I shook my head and blew it off, not thinking about it for the rest of the drive. I got off the highway and drove into the neighborhood. It was a very regular street with average houses. When I got up to the house my delivery was for, I parked right in the driveway and started walking up to their porch. As I was setting down the bag, I saw that the front door was cracked open. I didn't know if it was meant for me or not, so I just lightly knocked on the door and called out that I was dropping off their food. As soon as I did, I heard a somewhat disturbing sound come from down the hallway. It was a muffled thump that almost mimicked my knocking, like someone was banging on a door. A bit shaken, I opened the front door wider and called out again. I wasn't sure what to say, so I just repeated myself that I was delivering their food. A few quiet moments went by, then I heard a door open from the back of the house, and a guy came around the corner. He looked distressed and bothered, but I couldn't tell if it was because of me or something else. The guy walked down the hall and right up to the doorway I was in, not saying a word as he started to reach for the bag. But that's when I heard those thumps again from down the hallway. I looked past him in confusion as he turned and looked as well, then quickly turned back and looked at me, recognizing that I heard it too. "Is everything okay?" I asked carefully. The sound echoed through the walls again as the man just kind of stared at me, as if he were trying to think of what to do. "Why don't you bring the food inside for me?" he said, almost in a demanding tone. Nervously, I picked up the bag, but quickly realized how terrible of an idea this was. I felt threatened, like I had to follow him, but I also had a feeling that if I did, I wouldn't be making it out of there. In my hesitation, the guy's face showed he was even more bothered, angry even. He then reached out and grabbed the food right from my hands, then slammed the door in my face. Stunned, I stood there and listened as his footsteps went down the hallway and the thumping stopped. I couldn't do anything else at this point, so I hurried off the porch and got to my car. I ended my DoorDash after that one and reported the really disturbing scenario to the police. I think what ended up making me report it was that the man tried to get me to go inside his house. If not for that, I may have not felt there was enough evidence to get me to do anything. Unfortunately, though, the police informed me hours later that the man denied that anyone else was there and declined their request to search his home. At that point, there was nothing left to do other than speculate. I believe there was something truly horrible going on, and he was possibly ready to do the same to me, but I don't think we'll ever know for sure. I signed up for Uber Eats back when it was really gaining traction in 2021. I'd just gotten laid off from my previous job, and it seemed nearly impossible to find any other job quickly, so this was a bit of a risk that I hoped would work out. A couple of months in, I was enjoying it enough, and it was paying me enough for me to keep with it. This happened just around a year after I started. I'd fallen into the habit of waking up late and staying up late, so I hadn't started working until around dinner time. By 11:00 p.m., I still hadn't made enough to be good for the night, so I continued on, taking pretty much any order that popped up. It was at 1:00 a.m. when an order came through that was interesting. It was a grocery order from a 24-hour 711 gas station. I still accepted it, but it was just odd to me that someone would need groceries from a gas station in the middle of the night. I drove up and parked at the mostly empty gas station and went into the convenience store. The only person inside was a kind old man working at the register. I picked up the bag from him and also got myself a cup of coffee for the road, then headed back to my car. I got in and situated myself before backing out and getting on the road for the final stretch of the drive. Only a moment after getting onto the main street, though, I noticed a car's headlights right behind me. Mind you, this was very late and almost no cars were out, so I was sure I would have seen them before if they were so close. After some thinking, I thought they must have been at the gas station, maybe parked on the side of the building, and pulled out as soon as I did. I drove along this same road for a while, reaching the edge of town, when I suddenly felt something wrong with my car. It was way bumpier than usual, and a loud kind of scraping sound was coming from the right side. After a minute from noticing this, it became a lot worse, so bad that I had to pull off to the side before the car would break down in the road. I parked on the shoulder with woods on either side of me, but in the mirror, I saw the headlights of that same car slowing down and pulling in right behind me. Unsure what was going on, I decided to get out quickly and see what the problem was. I didn't know if the car behind me was going to try and help me out or if they had something else in mind, but I knew I couldn't go anywhere until I figured this out. I ran around to the other side of my car and quickly noticed the problem. My right tire was completely flattened, which was crazy. I hadn't run over anything, and usually flat tires happen gradually, not so suddenly like this. I took a closer look, seeing a gash right on the side of the tire that didn't look natural at all. Then I heard a door open from the car behind me. a man stepped out and waved at me. "I'm okay, thank you," I called out, trying to get them to leave before even approaching, especially after realizing this was all really sketchy. But the man kept walking toward me. Once he got maybe 10 feet away, I could see him more clearly. He was older with long grey and black hair and a bushy, untamed beard. He wore basic clothes, jeans and a hoodie, but they were covered in stains and grime. He came up next to my car and asked if he could help me out, showing a large smile. I said again that I was okay, but he only laughed, looking at my tire and back at me. A few seconds of awkward silence passed as the man held his smile before I lied and said I had a friend on his way to pick me up. Now, having rejected his help 3 times, the man's smile gradually fell into a straight face. He turned his body toward the car and very unnaturally looked around. This is when I got the immediate rush through my body to get away from this man, and I only had one option to do so. I bolted off the road into the tree line, hearing the man follow me into the pitch-black woods. It only lasted for a few seconds before I lost him. After that, I didn't go very far at all, still able to see the headlights on the road, and I could make out the man's figure moving around by the cars. A few minutes later, he got in his car and left. By now, I'd had enough time to pretty much figure out that this was all a setup from the Uber Eats order, having been followed from the gas station where he likely slashed my tire. However, I didn't think it would be so easy to catch him. His full name and everything on the app turned out to be real. I guess he didn't think that we would have tied it all back to the Uber Eats order. That being said, the punishment wasn't very harsh because he didn't harm me. He only stole some things from my car, though I'm sure that if I had stayed there on the road, I might not even be here to share this story. This happened shortly after I first got my driver's license. I was about 16 years old. Back then, I was driving an old car that my parents didn't use anymore. I was really lucky to have a car that I could drive right after getting my license because I couldn't afford to buy one on my own. During that time, I had a job at a store about 15 minutes away from where we lived. I was glad that I was able to drive myself to and from work because in the past, I needed to get a ride from my parents. Probably 2 weeks or so after getting my license, I was driving home from work one night. I got off at 10 p.m., so it was probably a little bit past then. The roads weren't too busy anymore, and I took the highway back most of the way. When I pulled off of the highway to another road, a car pulled off behind me. But it wasn't until my next turn that I thought anything of it. I turned a little bit late onto that road, not on purpose, but because that turn just kind of snuck up on me a bit. I was really new to driving and made little mistakes like that. So, when I turned, the car behind me suddenly turned right after me. It was only then that I realized how strange it was. They would only do that if they were intentionally following me. I drove down the road with the car behind me. It wasn't right behind me or anything, just a normal distance. I had about 3 more turns to make before my street. Soon, I made the first one, and the car did the same each time I turned. I was hoping to see the car just keep driving, but it didn't. By the time I was getting close to my street, I was extremely worried. I wanted to call my parents and tell them what was going on. Unfortunately, I didn't have a cell phone at the time. I also didn't want to drive home. If I did, whoever was behind me would know where we lived, and I didn't know who this person was. I was debating what to do, but when my street came, I turned onto it. It was something that I instantly regretted because the car turned right after me. Our street was pretty quiet. There were only like 15 houses on it, and it was a cul-de-sac. As I got closer to my house, I knew that I wasn't going to turn into the driveway. When I got to the cul-de-sac, I drove around it and then went back down my street. The car behind me followed just as they had been the entire time. After I made it off of the street and back onto a slightly busier one, I knew that I had to think of something. I drove down that road for a little ways and then decided that I would go to a busier area. The area that my house was in was pretty quiet. There was a lot of land and not as many businesses or people around in general. I started heading back towards where I worked. I didn't know exactly where I was going to go, but I just wanted to get to a busier area. I would feel safer with more people around. Maybe I would drive all the way to the city, but I certainly was not going to stop anywhere around my house. I followed the directions to my job. Like I said, I didn't have a cell phone, So that also meant that I could only go places that I already knew directions to. I didn't have access to a map or anything to guide me. I remember that I made it all the way back to my job and then turned into the parking lot. It was a shopping center with multiple stores in it. The car first turned in behind me, but then suddenly turned off and drove away. I was really surprised, but didn't take any time in driving as far as I could away from it. I went to the other side of the parking lot and took a route that wrapped around back to the highway that I needed to take to get home. When I drove home, I was very careful to look and make sure that I wasn't followed. I got home okay, and my parents were wondering why I was late. I told them about what had happened. They said that if that ever happened again, to go to a police station, which I wish I would have thought of, although I didn't know where one was off the top of my head and would have needed a map. After that, I got a phone only about a week later. Nothing remotely close to that has happened since. One time, a few months ago, I was driving my car late at night. I was on a quiet road, driving about 5 miles per hour above the speed limit. The road had just 2 lanes, one for traffic going the way I was and the other for oncoming traffic. I was just trying to get home and listening to the radio. I remember at one point I came up on a smaller pickup truck driving up ahead. When I approached it, I slowed down because the truck was driving much slower than I was. But soon, things got kind of ridiculous. The speed limit on this road was 50 miles per hour, and we were going almost 30 miles per hour. I remained behind the truck, going very slowly, for 2 or 3 minutes. Then, I decided that I would pass the truck. Maybe something was wrong with it, and it couldn't go very fast. I wasn't in a big hurry or anything, but going that much slower than the speed limit, I lost patience. I pulled out into the oncoming lane of traffic. Luckily, these roads were really quiet, and nobody was coming in the other direction at all. I started to pass the truck easily, but before I could clear it, the truck started speeding up. I was going about 55, and soon the truck was going at least 55 as well. This made me really angry. I sped up even more, and was finally able to clear the truck now that I was in front of him. But unfortunately, the truck was now right on my tail. His headlights were so close I wondered if his truck would bump into my car. It looked like a man was driving, but I couldn't really see all that well. Luckily, the truck didn't bump mine. Still, as I was going now 60 miles per hour, which was 10 over the limit, he was still right behind me. We both drove like this for maybe about a minute. When I saw that he hadn't let up at all, I decided that it would be best to just let him pass. I had to drive on this road for maybe another 5 miles or so, and there weren't any other roads to turn onto in the immediate area. So I decided to just pull over. I put on my hazard lights and moved over to the side of the road. As soon as I did, the truck behind me did as well. Now I was really mad. Was this guy angry with me for trying to pass him, and now he was following me? He had been going so slow, anybody would have done the same thing I did. I kept slowing down, and my car came to a stop. The truck did as well. We both sat there in our vehicles for a few seconds. I was angry, and I guess I was feeling like a tough guy. I decided I was going to get out and talk to the driver of the truck and ask him what his problem was. I opened up my door and started walking towards the truck. When I did, I held out my hands as if to say, "What's your problem?" I remember that as I was doing that and I was barely in the street, I saw the truck suddenly start to move. It was then that I realized this guy was going to try to run me over. The truck was driving straight for me. I ran back, but was only able to take about 3 steps. I then jumped and actually landed on the hood of my own car. The truck barely missed me and luckily didn't hit my car either. After he had missed, I saw him slamming on the brakes up ahead. I quickly jumped into my vehicle and started driving away. The guy in his truck then started following me again as soon as he got the chance. He was once again right on my tail, but driving more reckless than before. I was driving on the street, but then went to the far side of the road. The man swerved after me but went too far, and his truck ended up going off the road and into the ditch, the sort of big ditch. The truck didn't flip or anything, but it was enough to get him stuck. I kept driving and then called the police when I was a good distance away. They ended up locating the man, and he got a ticket for reckless driving. But I was unable to prove that he tried to run me over. I just hope I never see him again. This happened to me just a couple of weeks ago. I travel a lot for work and usually drive from the different locations. I was about 5 hours away from home at this time and was going to be driving back when I had finished with work at that location. I left to drive home at about 6 p.m. I knew that I would be getting home really late, but I had the next few days off, so I didn't mind the long day. Hours of driving went by very smoothly. I had the directions all set up on my phone through Apple Maps. I was making great time and felt like I would get home a little bit sooner than I expected. But at one point, maybe 3 hours into the drive, I was told to take an exit by my phone. This confused me a little, but I knew I had the directions in it, so I followed what it told me to do. I ended up driving on this quiet road for like 20 minutes, and then it told me to take a left. When I did that, this road looked even quieter than the previous one. I realized that my signal was starting to go out as well. Luckily, the map was still working, though I was getting really confused. So I pulled over on the side of the road and grabbed my phone to take a look at the map. I realized that it had automatically rerouted me because of potential flooding. It wasn't even raining, but there had been a lot of rain in the area the past few days. The road that I was on was extremely quiet and looked to be in the middle of nowhere. I kept the directions up because if I cancelled them to start over, I would not have any due to me not having a signal. I merged my car back onto the empty road and continued to follow the route home, which was now on back roads. Probably a minute later, my car dinged. I saw that I was almost out of gas. I kept driving and decided that I would look out for a gas station up ahead. I was sure that I would see one, but the more I drove, it was just the same grass and some trees on both sides of the road. 30 minutes or so went by, and I was still driving on that quiet road with no gas station in sight. My tank was really low at this point, and I was getting nervous. I got desperate, and I turned off of the road that I was on, hoping that another road would lead me to a gas station. My phone started rerouting again, and after that, I had no signal, and the map wouldn't load. I took another turn at my next opportunity, and now I was just making things worse. I turned around and went back to the first road that I had been on after realizing I was going into an even quieter area. Shortly after I got onto that road, my car came to a stop. I'd completely run out of fuel. Now, my car was stopped on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere with no signal. I had not seen any other car since I had been driving down this road. It was almost 10 p.m. I sat in my car trying to get my phone to work. I restarted it, but I still couldn't get a signal. Then, I saw headlights in the distance coming up behind me. I considered getting out of my car and trying to ask for help, but I ultimately decided not to. The car passed me by. That was the first car that I had seen on this road. I kept sitting inside of my car, wondering what I should do in this situation. I then noticed brake lights on the car that had passed me by. Now it was sort of a long ways up the road, but it appeared to be stopping. It sat on the road for a minute or so. I thought this was strange. Then it looked like it was starting to turn around. After that, I lost sight of it. Maybe 30 seconds later, I saw the car again. It was driving up on the other side of the road now, but its headlights were off. I was confused and wondered what exactly they were doing. They'd parked on the other side of the road about 50 feet up from my car. I kept my eyes on them as the driver's door started to open. I saw a man step out and start to walk in the direction of my car. It was really dark, and I couldn't see very well, but as he got closer, I could see that this man was wearing what looked like a ski mask on his face. I had a really bad feeling when it was clear that he was walking to my car. I decided I needed to leave. I took my phone, keys, and wallet and moved over into the passenger seat. Then I opened the door as quietly as I could, swung the door open, and ran into the grass on the side of the road. There was a bit of woods, and I ran for it. I could barely hear the person starting to run in my direction. I ran deeper and deeper into the woods. I kept going for as long as I could. When I was running, I thought I heard noise in the woods behind me, and I knew that the man was chasing after me. He was a ways back, but I knew I needed to run as fast as I possibly could. I was getting whacked by tree branches left and right. After probably 10 minutes of this, I found a spot that looked good for hiding. I wasn't really hearing the noises behind me anymore, so I decided I would hide there. I took a large stick and tossed it deeper into the direction that I had been running in the thick woods. Then I quietly hid myself behind a large log that was sort of broken. It had probably been sheltered to an animal, but it was a good place for me to hide. Now, I heard a few noises in the woods a long ways back. It was pretty quiet. So more time went by, and things became very quiet. I kept waiting there for probably 30 minutes. Then, I finally felt safe enough to leave my hiding spot. I walked back through the woods, trying to go in the same direction that I had come from. After about another half hour of walking, I finally made it back to the road. I was tired from all the running and walking through the woods. Luckily, I didn't see the other car on the road when I got back. I was a little ways down from my car, and I walked back to it. As I was approaching my car, I saw headlights coming again. At first, I was about to run back into the woods, thinking that it might be the same guy. But I realized that these headlights were much bigger and those of a truck instead of a car. I decided to stay by my car. The truck actually slowed down and came to a stop behind me. A man got out, who turned out to be a really nice guy who lived in the area. I told him about running out of gas, and he happened to have a small 2-gallon gas can in the back of his truck that he carried around. He let me put it into my car for free. Then he gave me directions to the nearest gas station. After he left, I was able to make it to the gas station, which was only like 2 miles away. It was a long night, but I finally made it home. Working the night shift at Walmart as a night stock person on the weekends was my second job when I was finishing up college. I needed to pay off my loans, so I had to make money however possible. I didn't deal with customers or anything. I would just sign for night deliveries, do warehouse work, and stock shelves in the store during after hours. The typical shift would usually be either 11 to 7 or 12 to 7. On July 9, 2015, a Thursday night, I still haven't locked into my brain. I was midway through my shift in the electronics department when I saw, in the corner of my eye, someone walked past the aisle I was working. This wouldn't usually catch my attention if it weren't for the fact that there were only 2 other workers in the building with me that night, Alvin and Bacco. They were both wearing the same staff shirts I was wearing. I would know because we all clocked in at the same time. The person I saw in the corner of my eye was wearing all black. So I naturally walked to the end of the aisle and did a little peep around the shelf. No one was there. I yelled both Alvin and Bacco's names, so when they didn't answer, it made it even stranger. But regardless, I went back to work. I was holding in a pay for a while, and I told myself I'd go when I finished work in that aisle. Seconds later, there was a huge crash a few aisles down. It actually startled me. I ran over to see what it was, and a bicycle was somehow knocked off its hook. The hook was still fine and in place. It seemed like someone would have had to put effort into knocking this down. I hung it back up and started walking around the aisles, suspicious as hell. I got to the last aisle towards the back of the store, which was the paper and cleaning aisle. Then there was this freaky-ass sound that I could best describe as a laugh. It sounded like it came from literally the next aisle over. So once again, I did a short run back to that aisle and felt my heart drop when I saw a man dressed in all black waiting by the end of the aisle with his back facing me, but his head turned so that all I saw was only half his face. Then he suddenly ran, not towards me, but down some other aisle. I heard his footsteps running around. I was faced with a choice of chasing after him or going to find my 2 co-workers, and I chose the latter. All the while, I heard these freakish laughing sounds and footsteps that I honestly felt like were circling me. I found Alvin in the women's department and told them to be on the lookout for someone who wasn't meant to be in the building dressed in all black. We didn't have walkie-talkies, so I asked him to tell Bacco if he ran into him. I excused myself because I couldn't hold it any longer. I had to go to the bathroom. I ran to the employees-only bathroom, which was in the warehouse section. I put a nest of toilet paper on the seat in one of the stalls and sat down. And yes, I'm the kind of person to sit when I pee. The door to the bathroom opened and closed naturally, with 3 to 4 people in the building. I said, "Who is that?" And with no answer, I assumed the worst. I heard that horrific laughing again, and someone stepped into view from between the crack in the door, looking right in. They stepped closer until the crack was completely covered, and all I saw of their face was an eye. Then the whispering began, unintelligible whispering, but the echo from the bathroom just made it more unsettling. I just remembered I had Alvin's phone number saved on my phone, so I got it out and called him at once. I was very loud with what I was saying, telling Alvin to get to the bathroom at once and help me. I stayed on the line with him and watched as the man on the other side of the stall left one more time, then ran out of the bathroom. I told Alvin to hurry, and 20 to 30 seconds later, Alvin entered the bathroom. He said he didn't see anyone on his way there. We didn't have any security guys working when the store was closed, so we couldn't even go look at the cameras. I stayed by Alvin the rest of the night, helping in whatever sections he was working in, because safety in numbers. I texted my boss that night, and when I woke up at 3 p.m. the next day, I read his response. He said all the camera screens returned static footage from the night before. Nobody went and turned them off as far as he knew. I got chills reading his texts. He believed my story and assumed it was related to the cameras. But with no video proof of the breaking and entering or trespassing, I don't think there was anything he could do. It was all above my pay grade though. That was the only night shift I've ever had where something truly unexplainable happened. What's one place you can go to and find the weirdest, freakiest creatures in our society? I swear I've never been to a single Walmart where I didn't see at least one eye-catchingly strange human being. Strange does not even cut it for what I'm about to tell you. It was the Thursday before Black Friday. My Walmart was open extra late. I was in there around 11 o'clock looking for a new laptop, and by chance, I picked up off the shelf the last one that was being promoted for a really good Black Friday deal. As I grabbed it though, some big, revolting, dirty-looking guy comes up to me and insists he needs a laptop very badly. I nervously said, "I'm sorry, it's the last one." Then he got angry at me and started making a bit of a scene. The man clearly wasn't normal, and my heart started racing simply because I don't get put on guard in these kinds of situations a lot. As others looked on at the commotion this big guy was making, I walked away with the laptop box quickly and went straight to a line. He kept yelling at me as I walked away. It was unbelievable. Some other customers on the line even tried to laugh with me and make me feel better, saying the guy was a nut. So I get home. My family is all asleep already. I go outside to sit in the yard by the pool and set up my new laptop. Then the light on the side of the house turned on, the one that turns on due to movement. I went to check the side of the house to make sure no one was there. Would that thing go off once in a while? Yeah, but there's a small patch of woods right next to the house, so animals would often run on the property, triggering it. Either way, I'm kind of a big wimp, so I went inside, locked the door, and finished setting up my laptop in the living room. A car alarm suddenly started going off outside. I recognized it to be my Cadillac. I looked out the window to confirm this. I ran to get my keys upstairs, then tried pressing the panic button to turn off the alarm. It didn't work from the inside, so I stepped out to the porch and clicked it off. But then I noticed a car parked in front of our house that wasn't there earlier when I got home, and any cars parked in the street on our block was suspicious enough. We live in a closed-off community, and everyone has huge driveways. I stepped down from the stoop and realized there was someone sitting in that car. I went back inside and locked the door. I went to my mom's room and told her, "I think someone outside means us harm." My mom and dad have a complicated situation, so my dad doesn't always stay with us. It would have been a different story having my dad there to tell about this. My mom came downstairs with me, noticeably worried based on what I told her. My mom took a look through the peephole in the front door, then gasped and put her hands over her mouth. I looked through it as well and felt ready to throw up when I saw a huge man standing on the other side of the door, on our stoop. I whispered to my mom, "I think that man followed me from Walmart." Suddenly, the doorknob started to turn as the man tried opening the door. When it didn't work, he started pounding on the door. That's when my mom let out a gasp and cry, and my younger sister came out from her room, who also started to panic when becoming wise to the situation. The pounding stopped, then there was a silence for a while, other than my mom's voice on the phone with the police. A few minutes went by, my mom's still on the line with 911 with police en route, and there was a loud bang and crash downstairs in the den. A window was shattered. My mom and sister both screamed and cried. I told them to run upstairs while I locked the door to the den. I waited down there expecting an attempt at the door or a bang. Nothing, surprisingly. I heard a police car briefly wail its siren outside my house. It was the quickest response time I'd ever heard of. I ran outside to lead them to the den where the broken glass was. There, they found the huge, dirty, crazy-looking man hiding behind one of our couches. He was arrested at once, and we pressed charges. All the while, he was screaming profanities and threats at me. Not helping his case, both cops told me the guy seemed unstable and on some kind of drugs, but told us to get a good night's rest because he wouldn't be bothering us again. So, while it may be fun to people watch at Walmart and laugh at some of the goofy things you see, realize you may also find some of the more dangerous people in our society in your local Walmart. My name is Samantha. I'm 20 years old and I work at a Walmart by a small town called Jackson in Alabama. Since I don't go to school full-time, my boss would oftentimes put me on an overnight shift back when the store was open 24 hours a day. Given that it was a supercenter, there would still be a number of employees working. My shift this one particular night was 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was one of only a couple employees doing stock work. There was 1 or 2 employees at registers up front. Given that our store sits in the countryside of Alabama, we didn't really get much business at these insane hours of the night. However, it was a prime restocking period. I didn't personally know the other employees working that night, but it's not like we'd run into each other in the giant store anyway. I started my night folding pants in the men's department and generally tidying up. I kept headphones in at night because usually there would be no one to tell me to take them out. A customer came to the gents section, and at that time it was around 11:30 p.m., so it wasn't really that weird. People would still come in and close shop till usually around midnight. The customer came up to me and asked me if we had any more of the specific pants he found in a different waist size. I apologized and told him only whatever was on the rack. He thanked me and walked away. I made accidental eye contact with him as soon as he stood by the rack putting the gens back. It was kind of awkward. He walked away and I continued with my work. Some time passed and the store started to look like a ghost town, no one to be seen as far as the eye could see. I think it was like 1 a.m. I had made my way over to the appliances section. I was doing a lot of back and forth work with boxes from the back section where we kept all the items that were yet to go out. I brought a wagon full of boxes to one of the aisles and started stocking the shelves. Because the shelves were empty though, I was able to see someone through the next aisle over, and they were watching me. Well, only up until he noticed me notice him, then he looked away. But his eyes looked really familiar. I stepped closer to get a better view, and I realized it was the same customer from like 2 hours earlier. How in the world could he still be in the store without making it obvious? I took the wagon with me and passed the next aisle over just to get a look and see if the man had any items in his hands. His hands were completely empty. No way could he be shopping for 2 hours and not pick up a single thing. Something wasn't right. I quickly finished up restocking the shelf with coffee machines and other appliances, then brought the empty wagon to the back area. I chilled out in there for a while because, quite frankly, I felt like that guy might have been following or watching me longer than I realized. I played on my phone for a little while in the employee lounge. Then when I figured it was time to get back to work, I decided I would do grocery work instead, just to be in a different part of the store. I went into the dairy cooler and filled a bunch of crates with dairy products like milk and yogurts. This took a lot of time to do because I had to check the dates on the products and such. Over the loud sound of the giant refrigerators keeping the cooler cold, I heard the door to the dairy cooler burst open. There was conveniently a gap in the boxes sitting on one of the pallets that allowed me to peek through it to the door of the cooler, and I swear it was that same customer. I ran to cover under one of the shelves and pushed a big box full of eggs in front of me. Didn't have to worry about making noise because the refrigerators were so loud. For anyone wondering why I decided to hide, well, I already assumed this guy was hanging around the store watching me, seeing him in the employees only section, never mind that coming into the dairy cooler. Seemingly something bad was definitely about to go down. I hid behind that box with my head down for the longest time, expecting to hear the doors to the cooler open and close eventually. After a while of hiding and not looking, I assumed maybe he left after looking for me. I lifted my head from my arms for the first time and looked up in front of the box and screamed. He was right there, smiling at me, standing over the box, but his smile vanished as soon as I started to scream. He tried putting his hand on my lips to muffle my scream, but I didn't allow that to go any further. I pushed the box of eggs over right into him, and the eggs falling to the floor made him step back, looking down at his shoes. I ran right past him, but he didn't grab me, so I continued to run till I found another stockworker and told him to help me. The employee's name was Bob, I remember from his name tag. Suddenly, the man from the dairy cooler came up to the two of us and apologized, explaining that he was from corporate and was coming to make sure everything was running smoothly. He said he didn't mean to scare me and was simply checking up on me in the dairy cooler to make sure I wasn't slacking off. This Bob guy seemed to believe it all, but then again, he didn't seem very smart at all. I asked the man why he put his hand on my mouth, and he said he was trying to avoid making a scene. Then, shockingly, he gave me the order to finish up the appliance section, and he disappeared as he was speed walking away down the aisle. I called out, "What's your name?" And he called back, "Tom," and just like that, he was gone. The next day, I called one of the managers and asked if there was supposed to be a visit from corporate the night before, and if a creepy man named Tom sounded familiar. My manager Margaret said it sounded like complete nonsense. There was no record of anyone from corporate named Tom who was supposed to come visit, nor would anyone from corporate ever be in the store at 2 a.m. They then went ahead and checked the camera footage, and a police report was filed when they realized this was a random man, and the cameras proved this man had been stalking me between the aisles for the better part of the first few hours of my shift. I told Margaret I couldn't do night shifts anymore after that, and she understood. I still work there, but more so as a day stock person or a cashier. This took place on my very last day of high school. I was in my senior year, so after I got through today, it would be the very end of high school for me. Of course, I was super excited and felt a huge amount of relief, but there was also a sadness in the air for me that day because all it really meant was that I was going to have to leave all my friends behind and have to make new ones in college. I tried to not look at it so negatively because ultimately it is what it is, and it's just a part of life, changes. I don't remember exactly why or what happened, but I was in a particularly bad mood this day because of things that were going on at home with my family. I think it was 5th hour, which was biology class. I didn't mind the class really, but the teacher was the one that made it horrible. Mr. Johnson was a jerk to me and many of the other kids in my class. I honestly don't know how he hadn't been fired sooner. He was notorious for getting into it with the kids and getting into screaming matches. One time he even broke a kid's phone, and another time he legit threatened me in front of the whole class. I don't think he works there as a teacher anymore, but I really didn't feel like going to his class that day, so I skipped it. I went over to the library, and my plan was to lay low until 6th hour. I hid in the back of the library in the computer section and pretended like I was doing my schoolwork, but really I was playing games on my phone the entire time. Not too long after this, all of a sudden, the school's intercom went off. We were having a lockdown. Although it alarmed me, I figured it was just a practice drill and that our school is just testing us again. Our school does at least 2 practice drills each semester, so I played it risky and decided to hang tight. But all of a sudden, I heard screaming down the hall. It was very muffled sounding, and I couldn't make out what was being said. All I could hear was the screaming. It seemed to have gone on for a couple of minutes. I quickly started to realize that we were probably in a real lockdown. I panicked, and I thought my best bet was to hide somewhere in the library, so I hid under the computer desks. Not the best spot, I know, but I figured it was better than nothing. I kept quiet and waited for the PA to come back on and for it to say the drill was over with, but it never did. It must have been 20 minutes of me just lying there in fear. I took my phone out at one point, and I saw that I had like 20+ messages from some of my classmates from biology, and they asked where I was and that we were in a real lockdown. That was when my heart dropped to my stomach and I started to feel sick. I told them all I was safe and that I was hiding in the library. There was nobody else in the library with me as far as I knew because there weren't any teachers or kids when I first walked in, which was actually quite unusual. Nonetheless, it freaked me out even more that I was pretty much alone. I just kept waiting in hopes that it was all going to be over soon. Well, it was only just the beginning. I didn't know what I had really got myself into by skipping class. A few more minutes passed by, and the screaming picked back up again, and then shortly after, I heard someone running through the hall. Then my worst fear came alive. The library door opened, and somebody was walking inside. Scared as I was, I managed to peek my head up to see if I could see who it was, but all I could see was a dark shadow of someone that looked to be around my height. I hid back under the desk, and that was when I saw a flashlight turn on. Whoever it was began searching all around. All I can remember is praying to God that I was going to be okay. Eventually, the person made their way over to the cubicle I was in by all the computers. I knew it was only a matter of seconds before he would see me, so I jumped out from under the desk again and made myself visible. "Hey," I said. Within a second, I had a flashlight pointing at me along with a gun. "Tyler, what the hell are you doing, man?" I asked. Tyler was one of my close friends in middle school, but we didn't keep up with each other much ever since starting high school. Through the years, we kind of had a falling out and went our separate ways. Anyways, I told him to put the gun down, and after almost a full minute of sobs from him, he started to break down crying and dropped to the floor. I kicked the gun away and reassured him that it was going to be okay, and I told him that we needed to do the right thing, and that he needed to turn himself in if he really wanted any chances of getting better. Surprisingly, he actually listened to me, and I walked with him towards the office until he found a teacher, and the teacher then led us to the police. I, as a witness, told them everything that I knew, and Tyler also complied 100% as well. I'm just happy that Tyler found me rather than someone else. I was one of Tyler's only friends in his eyes, and if he would have found someone else, I'm sure he would have killed them truthfully. We really need to raise awareness for this kind of stuff and do everything as a society that we can to limit the violence in school shooting, specifically as much as I don't like Tyler for what he did. He was a kid who was bullied and picked on his whole life and had a horrible home life along with different types of mental illnesses, unsure, so really, it's no surprise if you think about it what he attempted to do. That's usually how it goes down. It's deafening and unbelievably horrible that some people are capable of doing things like this, and that's to say the least. But we really need to do our best to prevent them from happening in the first place. It was just another normal day of school. I think I was in 10th grade. I want to say it was right after third hour. Anyways, it was lunchtime, so my friends and I were goofing off like we always would. We would all eat for maybe 5 minutes and spend the rest of the 20 minutes playing games and messing around and such. Well, about halfway through lunch, the PA went off and said that we were having an emergency lockdown, which was definitely kind of scary. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building, lock the door, and turn off all lights. Because usually, if it were just a drill, then the principal would say that, or at least warn us beforehand, so we knew to expect a lockdown in the near future. I vividly remember Mr. Harrison sounding a bit panicked when he announced the lockdown too. My friends kind of thought that was part of his gig to make it seem real, but I had a bad feeling about it. Now, this is probably the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life, and I still honestly have no clue why we did this, but after they shut the school's power off, my friends thought it would be funny to sneak out of the cafeteria through a side entrance that led upstairs to one of the main hallways of our school. I decided to tag along with them just because, I'm not really sure, I just did. After walking around for a little bit, we all split up, and at this point, it was only me and Andrew. Our 3 other friends ventured off by themselves somewhere. It was so dark in the hallways that we could barely even see what was in front of us. The only source of light we had was coming from the sun shining through the windows, but even then, it was a pretty cloudy day, so the outside didn't have much light to offer us. Then, out of nowhere, we heard 3 gunshots right in a row followed by screaming. Andrew and I, of course, started freaking out, so we ran outside and sprinted as fast as we could. I'm happy we were close to the main entrance of the school because I'd much rather have been outside than hiding in a bathroom or something. But now, we were in the front of the school and we knew we were sitting ducks for any of the teachers or police to find us. We didn't want to get in trouble for sneaking off when we shouldn't have been, so we ran behind the school and headed straight for the woods. We had to run across the soccer field to get there, but we made it across without being seen. Then we heard police sirens getting closer. I knew they were there for whoever the hell just fired the gun, but we were still paranoid that the school or police were looking for us for running off as well. I've had friends who have gotten into some trouble for truancy before, and I was definitely on edge about everything that was happening in general, as any normal person would be. This was a pretty serious situation, so we were freaking out for a while and trying to calm each other down. We also didn't want the police or anyone to think we had anything to do with that psycho with a gun. While the police weren't searching for us, and they literally had no idea we were missing in the first place, nor did anyone in the school. But we pushed our luck by continuing hiding because eventually the police found us as they were doing a required sweep around the premises. The police ended up finding us, and when they did, they detained us until they caught the actual suspect they were looking for. Apparently, the kid who let off the gunshots was someone who went to a whole different school, and he was only a year younger than me. Nobody got hurt, thankfully, but the kid said he was coming to kill some girls specifically, but he failed. Something weird I want to add real quick is how eerily similar me and this kid look. We were both the same height, same color hair and hairstyle, and we were dressed very similar that day. The police quickly figured out it had nothing to do with it though after we explained everything. I learned my lesson that day for sure,